Hello and welcome everybody to the Becoming Sugar Savvy webinar, which is supported through the Coburn Healthy Lifestyle program. Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you that aren't aware about the Coburn Healthy Lifestyle program, I'm just going to give you all a little bit of background about the program and so you can get some further information around where to access their services. Bear with me. So the Healthy Lifestyle program is run in the Coburn Integrated Health Building, and they run various different programs that offer support for healthy eating, increasing physical activity, and psychological services as well. If you're wanting to get more information around how you can register for any of these programs that they offer, you've got the email address down there, thehealthylife@cihealth.com.au, or you could simply give them a call. They also offer free health assessments as well. So all you simply have to do is get in touch, let them know what your goals are, and they can book you in for a free health assessment, and through that health assessment they can offer their various healthy lifestyle options and programs to support you along your way. And our webinar today is one of those services that they run. So let's get into it. So what is sugar? It's an interesting topic, and it's definitely very much a topic of conversation at the moment. So I thought we would start by talking firstly about what sugar actually is. So sugar is a carbohydrate, and I think it's important to understand that all sugars are made from individual sugar molecules known as glucose, galactose, fructose. There's many different forms of sugar molecules. They make up sugars, they make up simple sugars, and they make up more complex carbohydrates. So sugars in simple are two chains of two sugar molecules, while carbohydrates are longer chains of sugar molecules. So they're just a lot more complex. The most common form of sugar that we find in our dietary source is sucrose, which is comprised of a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule. So basically, when we eat carbohydrates or simple sugars, our body breaks all of these carbohydrates and sugars down to their simpler compounds, which are, like I mentioned, our glucose or our fructose molecules, and they are then absorbed into our bloodstream. So whether we eat lollies or bread, both of these types of carbohydrates affect our blood sugar levels, and obviously the degree at which that affects our blood sugar levels over a period of time depends on the complexity of the sugar molecules. So the amount and type of carbohydrate in each product ultimately affects the rate at which these carbohydrates are broken down, and that influences our blood sugar response. So there are about 30 commonly used variety of sugar replacements used in our food products, and we're seeing there's becoming more of a push, you could say, a bit of a health shift, or a bit of a fad shift, moving towards using alternative sweeteners. Some of these may be things like cane sugar, brown sugar. You may see the word molasses. You may see fruit juice concentrate, high fructose corn syrup, agave syrup, barley malt syrup, coconut sugar, even beetroot sugar. These, in the end of the day, are basically just different forms of sugar molecules and different forms of flavouring food through different avenues of sugar. So in the end, really, you could make sugar out of anything that contains any carbohydrate structure, because as we know, sugar is essentially just sweet, refined version of a carbohydrate, really. We're just getting the simpler forms of sugar molecules. So what is the best type of sugar then? So I'm always being asked, how much sugar should I eat a day? Is honey better for me than sugar? Should I be using raw sugar rather than white sugar? What about agave syrup? Is that better for me? We're seeing a shift from white sugar through to raw sugar to brown sugar. Now even things like rice malt syrup, coconut sugar, agave syrup. One thing I really think we should all be aware of is that all sugars contain roughly the same amount of kilojoules, and you're looking at about 17 kilojoules per gram of energy. It doesn't matter where this sugar comes from, the kilojoule content is the same. So if you eat a teaspoon of honey or a teaspoon of caster sugar or a teaspoon of brown sugar, the kilojoule content is going to be the same. So simply swapping out raw sugar for agave syrup or for coconut sugar, it's not going to have any impact on your total energy intake, which at the end of the day is basically what affects our body weight. So we need to be really mindful of just switching out one sugar type for another sugar type doesn't necessarily mean that that's a healthier option for you. And I think that's where some people are getting a little bit confused, where they think they're making a healthier choice, but ultimately we're actually not seeing that follow through in terms of weight management improvement, because we then think, well, we can eat more of it. So some of these added sugars do certainly have a slightly different glycemic index rating, although the effect is so minute that when we consider our recommended daily intake of these added sugars, we would basically need to be eating them by the wheelbarrow to actually get any nutritional benefit from them. So we wouldn't really recommend looking at sugar as a nutritional source in our diet. So just to wrap up, are some sugar alternatives better than others? In short, basically no. So ultimately, all sweeteners break down into a combination of glucose and fructose molecules and galactose, and they contribute almost identical amount of energy to each other. Okay, so it's all about the amount of sugar that we consume. Some sweeteners claim to have other nutritional benefits, such as providing some B vitamins or may contain a little bit of antioxidants. But remember, the amount of nutrients that they actually contribute to our diet are so minimal that we don't actually consider these sugar substitutes as a nutritional source. So they don't fall under our key main food groups. Okay, so what we're basically trying to say is don't get caught up in the hype. Don't get caught up in ultimately, agave syrup means it's better for me and I should be eating, raw treats all the time, because at the end of the day, it's about moderation and it's about the amount of sugar that we're consuming. Doesn't matter what type or what form that comes in. Okay, so it doesn't mean we have to fear sugar, but we definitely need to be aware and we need to understand where sugar is found, and so it can help us to enjoy sugar responsibly. So what should we look for then? So it can be difficult because now there's more sugars, more alternative sweeteners coming in many different forms. I would say keep it simple. Sometimes we tend to really overthink nutritional recommendations. Everybody's kind of looking for this, this hidden trick within, the media that's out there. At the end of the day, we need to look at the ingredient panel. So we need to look at what the ingredients are in a product. We need to be aware of sugar alternatives, and we need to be aware of different names of these sugar alternatives, because some products may contain 4 different types of sugar. The ingredients list is always listed from highest to lowest concentration. So if we choose a product that contains sugar in the first 1 or 2 ingredients, it indicates that it's actually really high in sugar. Whereas if that product had about 10 ingredients and sugar was the last ingredient, that's obviously the smallest percentage ingredient that's being added to that product, which is indicating it's actually quite low in sugar. Okay. You can also look at the nutrition information panel. Okay, so when we look at that, we look at the amount of sugar per 100 grams. So that lets us compare product by product on equal par. So if we consume 100 grams of one product to another, what is the sugar content? So what we aim for generally is about less than 10 grams of sugar per 100 grams. If it contains fruit, for example, so maybe you're looking at a cereal or possibly a yogurt that's a fruit flavoured yogurt and fruit is the main sugar component, we allow up to 15 grams of sugar per 100 grams. So yes, while fruit contains sugar, so that's our fructose-based sugars, the total amount of sugar content is a lot less in fruit, and then the nutritional benefits far outweigh the sugar consumption. So obviously, eating fruit in its most natural form is ideal, because as soon as we start processing fruit, we start to concentrate that sugar source, okay? And processing comes down to juicing and even drying fruit out. As soon as we start to affect the water content, we start to concentrate the sugar. So just in case, if you're not aware, this is a standard nutrition information panel. I just thought it would be important to point out that we're always going to see a per serving column. Okay, that tells us if you eat a single serve of the food, what what the sugar content may be. And then we've got the per 100 gram column. And that's where I mentioned that we want to look at the per 100 gram column to compare product by product when we're comparing the sugar content, because we don't always necessarily eat a product according to the serve size. Okay. So how much sugar should we have? Well, it's pretty difficult to tell. In Australia, we don't actually have any recommended amounts of added sugar. The World Health Organization recommends that for optimal health, we should limit our added sugars to less than 5% of our total energy intake. So obviously, if you wanted to give yourself your most accurate percentage, you would need to calculate your total energy requirement for the day, and then 5% of that should come from sugar. So in Australia, based on an average Australian adult of a normal healthy BMI, that works out to be about 6 teaspoons of added sugar a day. So it's really not a lot. So we have to consider sugar that may be in any sugary drinks we consume, if we put sugar in our tea and coffee, if we have sugar in our cereal, if we put sugar in any baked products. And remember, we're considering all types of sugar, which includes things like honey, includes things like syrup, would include jams, would include your raw refined sugar, okay, and agave syrup. All of those fall under that additional added sugar for the day. I think it's important when we talk about sugar to look at the impacts that sugar has on the brain. You know, in my clinical consulting, I hear a lot of people say they truly feel like they are addicted to sugar, and asking, could that be true? So given that sugar is in everything basically that we consume that's processed to some degree, it's important to understand how it affects the brain, to understand how it could actually lead to some level of addiction. Okay, so we know that consuming sugary foods and drinks leads to an increased craving for sugar. Okay, so we know that the more sugar you have, the more sugar your body wants, and the higher your cravings will become. So let's talk a little bit about how sugar affects the brain. I'll try and really narrow this down and make it really simple to understand. All right. So when we consume sugar in any refined form, whether it's even a complex component of sugar or refined sugar, the sugar molecules activates our brain's reward system. Okay. So the reward system in the brain is basically a series of chemical pathways which entices us to eat sugar again and again. It basically makes us feel good. Okay. If we continue to eat sugar in large amounts, we basically overstimulate this reward system, and it triggers off a series of, I guess, unfortunate events that results in us losing control over our cravings, basically. So the primary chemical or hormone that's responsible for triggering off our reward system is called dopamine. Okay, so dopamine is our feel-good hormone. We see that dopamine results in addiction in other avenues such as drugs and alcohol and nicotine. All of those examples also trigger off this reward system in a lot more elevated way than sugar does, but the pathway is pretty much the same. So when we might have drugs or alcohol or smoke nicotine, it sends our dopamine into overdrive, and that's what ends up leading to addiction, basically. Okay, sugar also causes dopamine release, but obviously not to the same extent as drugs and alcohol. So the more sugar we have, our dopamine levels become heightened, basically. They elevate, and therefore when we eat lots of sugar, we continue to want to feel that reward. Okay, so our dopamine levels continue to elevate. So when we then cut back and we eat less sugar, we're not triggering off the same level of dopamine, so we don't feel as good as we once did. So that's why cutting back on sugar, we can sometimes feel quite down. We can have our energy levels plummet. We even may get withdrawal symptoms like headaches and feel extremely lethargic and run down. And that's basically because of that depletion in our dopamine levels. So really the receptors in the brain become less sensitive, and we require more and more sugar in order to actually get a release of dopamine. So quite similar to, you know, the same thing that may hook somebody up into, you know, drinking or taking drugs is they get desensitized the more they have. So they need to continue to have more to get the same response. So that's where we can see that we may become addicted to sugary foods. Okay. So I've summarized that here for you. So you've got that summary there about how sugar does affect the brain, and it does link in with our reward system and our dopamine. So the key goal there is to try and never really have a really high sugar diet, because the more sugar you have, the more sugar you then need to help make you feel better and get that release of dopamine and that reward system. Okay. So what are some recommendations? You know, you're going, right, okay, so how am I going to get out of this sugar? What am I going to do to help control my sugar cravings? So the number one way that we can control sugar cravings is regularity of meal times. If you are skipping meals, if you're not eating balanced breakfast, lunch and dinner and having your healthy balanced snacks in between, and you're putting your system into a state of starvation, your blood sugar levels are going to drop, and you're going to constantly feel the need to replace that energy. And we often turn to sugary foods to get our energy levels up really readily and quickly. The problem is when we eat something that's highly refined and high sugary food, we get a hit of energy all within about 30 minutes to an hour, and then a sudden drop in energy. And then obviously we require more energy again. So it kind of starts this roller coaster effect of having a high in energy, a sudden drop, a high, a sudden drop. So balanced meals is number one. Until we're having regularity of meals and we're controlling our internal blood sugar levels, you will struggle to ever control your sugar cravings. Once your meals are regularly formed, once you know that you're eating healthy, balanced meals, we can then look at implementing things like mindful eating and non-hungry eating techniques. So if you've never done any mindful eating before, we're not going to have time today to delve into that, but you could obviously get in touch with us at Hardy Nutrition, and we can work through a lot of techniques and strategies to help you cope with your sugar cravings and your desire for sugar through using these techniques. We then can look at, obviously our healthier sugar alternatives, such as our fruit. So fruit is part of our everyday foods. It's part of our main 5 food groups, and we should all be eating, for adults, 2 fruit a day. So we can do things like microwaving an apple or a pear. So that's going to release a little bit more of the sugars. It's sometimes maybe a little bit more desirable to somebody to eat it that way rather than just eating an apple as it is. We could do some frozen fruit sorbets. Again, just noting that that is processing the fruit a little bit further. So you are going to get a slightly higher concentration of sugar. But again, it's a lot healthier alternative rather than turning to your alternative shop-bought sorbets that are loaded with added sugars. Okay, you could even try a couple of dates instead to replace your chocolate. Remember, our dates still contain our fiber, but the amount that we have, we still need to be mindful of, because dates are very high in fructose, which is still a sugar source. So kilojoule wise, we need to control the amount we're having. And then there's another good idea of something like your 3-ingredient pancakes, which is simply 1 banana to 1 egg to 2 tablespoons of self-raising flour. So again, all of those ingredients come from our main food groups, and we're not actually veering off track, and we're adding in, more of our discretionary foods and our high-fat, high-sugary foods. Herbal teas and tea infusions are another way, and sometimes it may just also be replacing our fluid sources and finding a sugar-free alternative. So you could use that to tie you over as well. I know a lot of clients that we see say having a herbal tea in the evening helps to curb their sugar cravings after dinner. You could go down the line of using natural sweeteners, so something like a stevia or a natvia. You could definitely look at using one of those. And then also identifying with your habitual triggers. So this ties in a little bit around mindful eating and kind of looking at those strategies. Is it every day, after work, you sit down, you eat your dinner, and then you hit your relaxed time where you might be, either watching TV or, skimming through Netflix or reading a book, that we tend to kind of find those sugar cravings may hit. And sometimes that's obviously an habitual craving that we've now developed to relaxing, de-stressing, and the body wants to trigger off those dopamine levels. So really it's then taking away that trigger point. So it's about, okay, if I'm going to eat some chocolate now, I need to make sure that I'm not doing it while I'm watching TV. So we basically disassociate the habit with the sugar intake. All right. So that's looking a lot more into that non-hungry eating and that mindful eating. All right. And like I said, if you feel that that's something that you want to delve further into, you can always get in touch and we can organise for you to come in for a dietary consult to give you some further guidance. We also do have heavily rebated dietary consult sessions available through the Cockburn Healthy Lifestyle Program as well. At the moment, they've only confirmed funding till June 2020, but that's another way that you could obviously link in through them further and access our services through their program. So what are the take-home messages? Basically, don't get too caught up on the small stuff. Let's focus on the bigger picture, all right? So the focus should be on reducing all sorts of added sugars in our dietary intake, okay? So like I said, just because you may think coconut sugar is better off for you, we still need to monitor the amount that we're having, okay? The best way to cut out added sugars of your diet is to limit processed foods. So most of our added sugars aren't necessarily that people are adding them intentionally, it's coming through processed packaged products. So try and stick to whole, fresh, unprocessed foods as much as possible. Having regular balanced meals, like I said, is the primary way to initially start to stabilize your blood sugar levels, okay? And remember, sugar is sugar. So at the end of the day, the focus should be rather on how much sugar we're consuming and where that's coming from, and making sure that we're limiting the amount of processed added sugars in our diet. All right. So thanks all for listening today. As I mentioned, you've got the Healthy Lifestyle Program that you can link into if you would like a little bit more support with. It could be potentially developing a healthy meal plan to help get your meals balanced, to avoid skipping meals. If you want a bit more support about mindful eating and non-hungry eating, we can obviously organise for you to access some dietitian consults under that service as well. And also they've got a whole range of other programs that you could access some advice. I'm going to open up now to any questions for those that are listening in live today. So yeah, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask any questions that you may have.